This week, the world was introduced to West Hills through the Woolsey Fire. You might have seen last Friday, West Hills was literally engulfed in flames. They evacuated the Torah scrolls to people's homes. The synagogue was closed last Shabbat. In fact, the B'nai Mitzvah met at Valley Beth Shalom. Amazing, amazing acts of gratitude that we saw just within the Jewish community over these last couple of days. But when I was watching what was happening just miles from here in our own backyard, it was a paradox. It was the exact opposite of what our tradition teaches about fire. We know that firefighters were working around the clock so hard to save homes and lives, to literally extinguish physical fire. But our tradition in Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, tells us, Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, that the candle of God is the soul of the human being. So in order to bring kindness, acts of chesed, acts of righteousness into our lives, instead of extinguishing a flame, it says within our own heart, we in fact need to ignite a spark and engulf a fire inside of us in order to make this world a better place. The Sfat Emet, a wonderful commentator of Torah, looks at the word candle in Hebrew, the word ner. It's just two letters, nun, resh. And he says nun stands for nefesh, for soul, and resh stands for ruach, for spirit. And I couldn't help thinking about this teaching as I watched flames, that what is inside a flame when you look should be our soul and our spirit. You know, the rabbis teach that there is a difference between a Shabbat candle and a Hanukkah candle. The Shabbat candle is supposed to be used to enjoy. In fact, it's supposed to be put on your Shabbat table so that you can see each other, so that you can see your food, so that you can have Oneg Shabbat. You can have a time of celebration. But Hanukkah is completely different. Hanukkah, it is told that we are prohibited to use that light. But we have one job, and it is just to stare inside the flame in order to ignite the nefesh and the ruach, our soul and our spirit. I couldn't help but think about that teaching as I watched indirectly from afar. But last week I learned of two families that I know well that lost their homes in that fire. The first was a member of my synagogue in West Hills, and I called them after Shabbat last week, and I said, what can I do, what can we do as Sinai Temple community to help you in these moments? And she said, Rabbi, the thing that you can do is share these two stories with your community. The first is she has a 15-year-old son, and older son's in college in Oklahoma. And the 15-year-old son every Sunday volunteers at a thing called Champions. It's a little league for special needs kids. And he called the director of that little league, Lisa Kodemer, and he said, Lisa, I can't come tomorrow because my t-shirt that tells everybody that I am a Champions volunteer, it's been destroyed. It's an amazing moment when this child has lost all of his possessions. And what he was worried about was the t-shirt that he lost off his back because he wanted to help others. Then I asked Heather, I said, Heather, did you have any time to go back into your home and take some of your possessions? She said, Rabbi, I took two things. She said, I took my ketubah, and I took the glass that we broke at our wedding. The only two things she took from her home were simple objects that could theoretically easily be replaced, but it represents so much more. And that's the gift of eternal love. The gift of love. Second phone call I made last week was to Mike Garson and his family. I met Mike Garson a couple of years ago through my own involvement and personal narrative in the special needs community, and his own personal narrative with the grandson of special needs. Mike Garson is a master pianist, a master composer, but most importantly, a master mensch, a good person. Mike is well known as the piano player for many years for David Bowie and toured the world. I've been to Mike's house several times, seen his amazing, amazing studio. And when I called him, he said, "Rabbi, I've lost my home." The picture he showed me was of a melted piano, custom made. And I said, "Mike, what can we do as a community, as a rabbi, as a person?" And he again said, "You can give me a Shabbos dinner. You can throw me an Amazon card, a Target card to get us going, but we have toothpaste and toiletries and clothes rolling in." But he said again, the one thing that you can do is share a message with your community. He said fans and friends, famous people, strangers he helped 40 years ago have reached out to him this past week. And he said, "Here's the message." He said, "All of the outpouring of love that I have felt and my family has received this week, don't wait for the next fire. Call them in times of shalom. Call them in times of peace." The next day, Mike called me back. This time he was in tears. He said, "Rabbi, I have to tell you something about God." His family went back to his house, which was now in ruins. And he said there were two things that survived that fire unscathed. Completely okay. The first were two stones that his wife Susan bought him many years ago. And on those two stones were these words: hopes and dreams. Hopes and dreams. And the second thing that was not destroyed was this: a mezuzah in the shape of a piano. We read this morning in our parsha, when Jacob lies his head down on the pillow, a stone, he says, "Achen yesh Adonai v'anochi lo yadati." God was in this place and I did not know. And after Jacob gets up, he puts down a stone, a monument, and he calls that place Beit El, a house of God. And the rabbis ask, what happened to that stone? And they answer, that stone became the Even Shtiyah, the foundation stone for the temple in Jerusalem. It wasn't just a physical stone, but it represented faith. It represented the idea of the ability to rebuild not just physically, but most importantly, spiritually and through love. Rabbi Danny Gordis, who many of you might know, he lived many years here in California, was head of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies many years ago before making Aliyah. He wrote a book, and it was called God Was Not in the Fire. It's not a book about fire, but in fact it is a book about spirituality in our tradition of Judaism. And he says that Judaism tells us that we must resign ourselves to understand that we will not know everything in this world. We will not understand why and how things happen. But at the same time, we must continue to persist in trying. That we must live in that gray area of not knowing. Rabbi Gordis says that Judaism allows us to validate our struggles while continuing to encourage us to move on. The book is called God Was Not in the Fire because it's named after the story in the book of Kings and Malachim, where Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, is running away from King Achav, King Ahab, and he screams out, God, please answer me if you are there. And God says, go stand on my mountain. Go stand on the mountain. And he does exactly that. In an instant, there's a storm, there's a huge wind. And the book of Kings says God was not in the wind. And then comes an earthquake, and it says God was not in the earthquake. And then becomes a fire, and it says God was not in the fire. And finally, the Torah tells us there was a cold mamadaka. There was a still, silent voice. That's where God was. And when Elijah heard that, he left the mountain with faith and with strength. The cold mamadaka, that still, silent voice. In Heather's ketubah in broken glass. In this mezuzah, in those stones of hopes and dreams. Albert Einstein once said that we can look at this world in two ways. One, that nothing is a miracle. But the other way you can look at it is that everything is a miracle. That's what we do as Jews. That's how we, on the holiday of Hanukkah coming up in just a couple of weeks, that's how we were different than the Greeks. Because the Greeks had no ability to understand that there were miracles in front of their eyes. But the Jews understood differently. They knew there was tragedy. They knew there was loss. They knew there was suffering. But they knew that there was miracles as well. They knew that deep down inside there was a God that existed that cared, and there is a God that exists that loves. So that's why last night we all had the ability again to light Shabbat candles, to look into a flame, and to rediscover the Ner, the Nefesh, the soul, and the Ruach, the spirit. To pray that that holy flame will be back in our lives in order to heal our shattered hearts. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, may your light and your flames only be a bracha, a blessing, and not a kala, a curse. May your flames only be of chayim, of life, and not of mavet, of death. May your light increase, reaching out to those we love, not only in times of tragedy, but in times of shalom, of peace. When that still small voice, that cold mamadaka, will continue to echo in our hearts. This morning, Mike Garson is here with us, with his family. And Mike told me that he wanted to be in shul. In fact, Mike is from Brooklyn. He said he wanted to be a rabbi, and I told him I wanted to be who he was. But after a difficult week, he has composed a piece of music. Because the things that do exist are the love, and what his legacy is, music. This morning I introduce you to my good friend, Mike Garson.